Hi guys, welcome to this video series. We're going to be looking at how we're going to create a digital portfolio using HTML5 and CSS3. As you can see on the screen, we've got a desired output here, which is our web page that's going to have information about ourselves, the units we're studying, and it's going to be laid out in a way that hopefully looks visually pleasing. We're going to be using another tool today as well. We're going to be using Notepad++, which is also free to download, and you can download 32-bit and 64-bit versions of this software. Stay tuned. Okay guys, so once you've downloaded and installed Notepad++, we're going to be using this as our default HTML text markup tool. Now you may hear me throughout this series refer to HTML as both markup and as code. This is due to the fact that HTML in its very nature and in its very name, hypertext markup language, is actually markup, it's not code. However, across the World Wide Web and across the world, people do refer to it as code. So let's just jump straight into our Notepad++ area, and as you can see, it is just literally a blank canvas once you load it up. What you will want to do is you will want to make sure that we are getting into the process of using correct naming conventions, and also making sure that we've got good housekeeping so that we've maybe structured our project folders to allow us to put images, cascading style sheets later on into one specific area so that we can pick that up like a handbag or a carrier bag and take it wherever we want. So what we need to do in Notepad++ is go up to the File menu, and we're going to click on Save As before we've even done any markup or coding. You'll notice that I've already got a folder on my area called My First Portfolio on my desktop. It's very worthwhile trying to create a folder per project that you're doing so that you can keep all the assets and the images, videos, audio, if you have any, cascading style sheets and HTML all together so that you can make sure you're managing your projects wisely and sensibly. So I'm going to be using My First Portfolio folder, and I'm going to name this file index.html. Now you may notice that I'm actually writing the file extension type in the actual file name area. You can do this, this will work if you are in the processes of doing things from drop downs, or you like to do the drop down method. It is there. If you scroll down, you'll see that it's got hypertext markup language, and it's got the different variants of the HTML file prefix that you can choose. But as I say, I tend to put in .html at the end of the file name. It's just a habit. Now notice that the file name itself is with a lowercase I. It is very well worth remembering that we are creating files that will be placed onto web servers that could be Linux based, they could be Windows based, and they deal with file naming in very different ways. Linux can see one file, whether it's saved as index with a lowercase and an index with an uppercase, as two separate files, whereas Windows is a little bit more forgiving. It sees the index with an I, a capital I, or a lowercase I as one file. Now, when we deal with web development and we deal with web servers, the default is that you save it with a lowercase I, and that is important. The reason we also call the first web page of our website index is it is our point of entry. Whenever you put a web file onto a web server, how do people, or how do browsers know what file to load up? Well, they always will go to index as a lowercase I dot and then whatever the extension is, because we can deal with not only HTML files, we can deal with PHP files, we can deal with ASP.NET files, amongst many. But in this instance, in this tutorial sessions, we're going to be looking at HTML specifically. So here I've saved it as index.html, and once I'm happy with that, I will save. Yep. So you now notice that in the tab area here we have index.html, and that means that the file has saved as that file name. Also well worth noting is the fact that the disk here is blue. This is blue because it hasn't had any edits or changes to the original file that was saved. If I was to enter the letter A, you may notice that the disk will go red from blue. That means that there has been some work done to the file that hasn't yet been saved. If I just Control Z that, it takes it back to its original state, and you can see that it is returned to blue. So these are quick wins in terms of knowing whether you've saved a file or not, and to whether a file is not working properly, or maybe you haven't saved it at its last point. So always check on this little diskette up here. So let's just jump straight into the creation of our web pages. We're going to be using a selection of different markups here today. We're going to be using HTML, we're going to be using CSS, and we will be using a little bit of JavaScript. So the first tag that I'm going to teach you is a comment tag. Now you may hear me refer to HTML as tags. Well, HTML, it uses a collection of tags to give some form of structure and scaffolding for the file to work. So the first tag that I'm going to introduce you to is the comment tag. And the way that we do that is we use the open pointy bracket, an exclamation mark, and a minus minus. Now you might notice that the tag has actually turned green. This is because Notepad++ has noticed that this is actually going to be a comment. Now if I now put information in here to say that this is a comment, everything is green. Now I want to close this comment at this point because I don't want anything else to be a comment. I want to get into the creation of HTML markup. So what I need to do is add a minus minus and then close that pointy bracket like that. This tells the program and also the browsers when they open the file that that is the end of that comment. The great thing about these comments is that they are not rendered or displayed to the user on the screen. So when somebody comes onto your web page and uses www.yourdomainname.com and takes you to your index page, you won't see any of the comments across the page because they are using these tags. So let's move on. The next bit we need to do is we need to give this document what's known as a document declaration type. So this is denoted by using an open bracket, open pointer bracket, exclamation mark, DOC, TYPE in all uppercase, and then HTML. And then we're going to close that bracket there. This tells the browser when it opens the actual web page that this is actually a HTML5 page and that it should be treated accordingly. Now I'm going to start as I mean to go along, and I'm going to add a comment just to remind myself that this is the document type declaration. So I'll put in that this is a document type declaration, and close it. The next tag that we're going to be placing in is the HTML tag. Now this is telling the browser here is the code or the markup, the hypertext markup language that's going to be used that needs to be interpreted by the browser. Now this is what we call an open tag here. Notice it's blue, and now I'm going to do a close tag, and a close tag in most instances have a / at the beginning of the tag itself. So here we can see that that completes the HTML open and close tags. Now Notepad++ is really good because it does allow us to see quite quickly where an open and a corresponding close tag could be. If I click on either or, the open one or the close one, you'll see that actually they highlight to show the corresponding tag, which is very useful because when we do create more HTML markup, that our pages will become quite large in size, and then we won't be able to quite easily see where an open or a close tag is. The other way to deal with this is to use a process that I use personally. Is whenever I create an open tag, I'll always create a close tag. That means that I know that I have quite safely created and placed a close tag inside of their HTML page. So inside of our HTML, we're going to be placing a lot of content. This content is both visible to the user, so everything they'll see on the screen here, and stuff that they won't necessarily see that works in the background. And the way that we place the stuff that isn't seen on the screen is we use what's known as a head tag. And the head tag is within inside of this HTML. Now I use the analogy with my students that the HTML tag here and the HTML tag here are essentially the front cover and the back cover of a book that contains lots of chapters and lots of content. So here's my front cover, and just inside my front cover I'm going to put the head information. So we're going to open a bracket and we're going to open the head tag, do a couple of lines down, and then do the close tag as well. So inside our head tags, we're going to be placing information that will both not be seen by the user and some very limited stuff that will be seen by the user. And inside the head, we'll be placing the title. Now, the title on most web pages will refer to the things in the tab if you're using things like Chrome or Edge or Safari, anything like that. Historically, in old toolbars or old browsers, it used to be across the top part in the blue area up here to say what the page was about. And the way we do that is we add a new bracket, a new tag called title, and then we do the close tag there as well. Don't worry, just at this point in time, I'm not going to be placing any information in here. I'm just putting the structure together so that you can follow along. So underneath our title tag, we're going to place some really key pieces of information that will allow both the browser and any search engine bots that are crawling across our web pages to find out what's going on. So the first one we're going to be using is very quite important, is called a meta tag. And this meta tag allows us to give information about things like our character set. Now, character sets or char sets refer to the character set structure that we're using. We're going to be using the UTF-8 character structure. This can be displayed in a number of different ways. It can be displayed as char sets UTF-8, or it can be char sets ISO-8859-1. And this basically refers to the way in which the characters are compiled and coded inside of our websites and on our computers. This deals with things like special characters, punctuation, symbols that we're likely to use, because each one of these is converted down into binary numbers, and the encoding character sets that we use allow us to have more symbols and characters than maybe we did historically. But we are using UTF-8 structure in this one here. So we're going to move on from the character set declaration, and we're going to go into something that's quite important again, which deals with the way in which our pages will be displayed on things like tablets and on desktops, mobile phones, and portable devices. And we're going to use something called meta space name equals speech mark viewport. Now this will allow us and the browser to detect what the viewable window is of the browser that is using this HTML markup at this time. And that will allow it to then render or choose which style sheets or which chunk of styling should be applied to your page in order for it to be appearing in its best possible state. So if you're on a mobile phone, it will optimize it so that maybe the text is a bit bigger, the navigation bar is using what's known as a hamburger menu, so that you can gain access to all of the website's functions and features. So inside of our viewport element, we're going to add a few more properties, and we're going to add one called content, and we're going to give it the value of width equals device hyphen width. And then we're going to go comma, and we're going to give it an initial scale of 1. And then we close that. So they're two pieces of quite important information. We can add more meta tag and meta values inside of our web pages, and these are some of the things that you can go off and do individually. You can add information such as the owner or the author of the page, which is quite good and quite useful if you're going to be creating a number of different pages and websites over the years, to get some sort of attribution to the fact that you have created that website. It's not displayed to the users, but if there are any web developers, or maybe someone is looking or touting you for employment purposes, that you can show that yes, you've made these websites because you're attributed with those inside of the actual markup itself. So now we're going to move forwards, and we're going to show the implementation of cascading style sheets, or CSS. CSS can be implemented in 3 different ways. The way that we are going to do it in the examples today is we're going to use what's known as the embedded method. And the embedded method is where we add our style or our presentation to our pages directly, but we place that information inside of the head area. Now, as I said, we can implement it in 3 different ways. There are the embedded, which is what I've just explained to you. You can do inline, and you can do external. So I'll go through each one of them, and I'll give you the pros and cons of using them. So if we use inline is where we apply specific formatting to a specific object or element on our web page. So as you can see in our meta tag element here, we added some properties inside of it. You can do that on most tags inside of the HTML, and this is inline styling. It is not necessarily the preferred way of doing this, because you may find that you're actually bloating your web pages. So when I say bloating, I mean you're adding content that could be duplicating or triplicating, or a number of instances where they are looking or having the same style attached to them, which is not useful, because the more information we place inside of our HTML pages, the larger the file sizes become. So we want to be very mindful of the fact that we want to keep our web pages to the slimmest as we can, so that we don't use much bandwidth when we're sending our web pages to users to view. This has a twofold issue, because you may find that actually it's not necessarily the people that are downloading from you, because they may have a very fast speed. It could be your bandwidth allowance on your servers if you're paying for a service. So you want to make sure that you're sending out the slimmest possible files out to your users for them to be able to use. The flip of that is that you may have the fastest speeds and you may have the biggest bandwidth that there is going, but your users may have very slow internet connections. And users these days wait between 3 to 5 seconds for a web page to load. And if they have a slow connection and your files are quite large, you will find that they don't want to wait around for your pages to load, and they will go back to their search engines and they will find something that loads quicker. So that is inline CSS. We then have embedded CSS, and this is how we're going to do it in our pages. And where we place our embedded element is inside of the style tags up at the top here. And what that means is, instead of attaching style to individual elements, we can set it out once and then have the elements refer to that as the style. So for example, our buttons here, they will have the information that relates to the button, where they go and what they do, but the styling, the presentation of them is identical. So we give these individuals a name and then we refer it to one style up in our HTML or in our CSS. And that makes it much more streamlined and much quicker. Now, as you know, most websites have multiple web pages. So it may be that this information is duplicated itself, and we don't want that to happen. So we can do the third implementation, which is external. And what we do is we have a link in the top of our web pages that links to the style sheets, so that all the pages refer to that one page for its presentation and style. However, for this instance and for this activity, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be placing our styles inside of our head, so we are embedding our style sheets so that we can get our pages to a point where we're very happy with how they look, and then once we're happy with their presentation and how they look, we can then copy that CSS code out and place it in an external file so that we can reduce the amount of bandwidth that people would use and we would use to render that information. We're now going to move on